At dinner, my son-in-law threw wine in my face and sneered, "This isn't your house anymore." My daughter froze, her fork trembling midair. He laughed, proud of his little performance. He didn't know that the very house he bragged about was still under my name, and that his arrogance had just signed his own eviction notice. The next morning, when he woke up, what he saw made his heart stop. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are now? My name is Eleanor, I'm 65 years old. I'd always believed that marriage changes people, but I never expected it to turn my daughter into a shadow. Angela used to be full of laughter, the kind that made even sad walls smile. Now she sat at her own dining table like a guest afraid to speak. "Pass the salt," Martin said sharply, not looking at her. He didn't say please. He never did. The chandelier light shimmered across the table, reflecting on his wine glass, his constant companion. The smell of whiskey and roasted chicken filled the air, but the food tasted of tension. When I reached for the salad bowl, Martin smirked. "You know, Evelyn," he said, swirling his glass, "you're lucky we let you stay here. Most sons-in-law wouldn't tolerate an old mother-in-law in their house." I looked up slowly. "Your house?" My tone was calm, maybe too calm. Angela shifted in her chair. "Martin, please don't." But before she could finish, the sound of liquid splashing cut through the air. Cold wine dripped down my face, staining my blouse. For a moment, I couldn't move. The shock wasn't from the liquid, it was from how proud he looked after doing it. "Now it feels like your place," he sneered. "Servants should learn to stay quiet." My daughter's face crumbled. "Martin, stop it," she cried, reaching for a napkin. But I gently took her hand and smiled. "It's all right," I said softly. "He's just drunk." Inside, though, something old and powerful woke up. The part of me that had once built empires of patience and raised children with pride. He thought I was weak. He thought I was staying here out of mercy. He had no idea. After dinner, I quietly cleaned my face, folded my napkin, and went to my room, the same room my late husband and I had shared when we built this house from the ground up. Every wall held our laughter. Every corner still whispered his promise. "Evelyn, this home will always be yours." As the clock ticked past midnight, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the folder, yellowed, but still powerful. Inside it lay the truth Martin didn't know, the deed, the ownership papers, and a will with my name written in bold ink. I ran my fingers over my husband's signature and whispered, "Time to remind him whose house this really is." That night, the house felt alive again, like it was waiting just like me. The house was silent after everyone left, but not peaceful. Silence can have weight, the kind that presses down on your chest until even breathing feels like confession. I stood in the kitchen under the dim yellow light, holding the stained napkin that still smelled of wine and arrogance. The red mark on my blouse had dried to a rusty brown.
I didn't bother to change.
The stain wasn't the problem, it was what it meant. Angela came in, voice trembling. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think he'd." I stopped her gently. "He didn't do anything I didn't already expect." Her eyes glistened. She wanted to defend him, she always did. But the words died in her throat. She left quietly, retreating to the upstairs room she once decorated with laughter and books before he replaced them with cold leather and louder televisions. When I was alone again, I began to notice things I hadn't before. On the sideboard, an unopened envelope addressed to Martin Reed, property tax notice. On the kitchen counter, his phone screen blinked with a notification, "Mortgage payment overdue. Respond immediately." And on Angela's tablet, left charging on the counter, a half-written email to Reed Property Group discussing ownership transfer and account consolidation. A chill moved through me. I wasn't sure what angered me more, the wine or the realization that something larger, something quieter, was happening behind my back. I sat by the dining table again, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers. This table had seen birthdays, Sunday breakfasts, and long talks with my late husband about our future. He built this home from nothing. He made me promise that no one would ever take it away. And now this man, this boy pretending to be a man, thought he had? I closed my eyes and whispered, "Not yet. Not ever." That night, while the rest of the house slept, I opened my old box of records, receipts, land documents, even handwritten notes from the day we finalized the house. The dates, the numbers, the signatures, all still there. All still mine. I smiled faintly. My heart wasn't racing from anger anymore. It was from purpose. He thought humiliation was the end. He didn't realize it was only my beginning. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The house creaked softly like it was listening, waiting. And so was I. Morning light spilled across the dining table, catching the rim of the same wine glass he had thrown. I hadn't moved it. Let it sit there, a reminder. Every stain has a story. I brewed my coffee, steady hands despite the storm in my chest. Martin left early for work, or so he claimed. I watched his car roll down the driveway and vanish through the gate. Then I got to work. The first call I made was to an old friend, Harold, a retired accountant who had managed my husband's business years ago. He was the kind of man who didn't ask why until after he already had the answer. "Eleanor," he said, voice lined with age but sharp as ever, "you sound different." "I am," I replied quietly, "and I need your help." Within hours, we sat in the back corner of a small cafe off Main Street, the same one we used to frequent after Sunday service. I slid the tax notice across the table. He adjusted his glasses, scanned it once, then twice. "Your name isn't on this anymore," he murmured. "When did you transfer ownership?" "I didn't." He looked up slowly. That's when I saw it, the first flicker of something cold crawling into his eyes. We traced the paper trail from there. Recent filings at the land registry, changes in account details, emails linked to a law firm I'd never heard of. Every document pointed to one thing, a transfer of ownership to my daughter and son-in-law. But the signature, my signature, was wrong. "Harold, can you confirm that's forged?" I asked, voice low but steady. He nodded grimly. "Without a doubt. Whoever did this had access to your personal documents." My stomach twisted. Access? There were only two people who did. Angela and Martin. I left the cafe with a folder full of copies Harold had printed. All the evidence I needed, though I wasn't sure if my heart could handle what it meant. Back home, the house felt unfamiliar, as though it already knew it was being stolen. The family portraits looked like strangers. The ticking clock sounded like a countdown. That evening, I caught a glimpse of Martin through the window. He was on the patio, laughing into his phone. "Yeah, man. House is under control," he said. "She won't even know what hit her." He was right, I had known. But now I did. And knowledge in the right hands can be more dangerous than any weapon. I closed the curtain and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, my reflection in the glass didn't look defeated. "Let's see," I whispered, "how you handle what's coming." The next morning, I dressed like I used to when I worked at the bank. Pressed suit, polished shoes. No emotion on my face. People underestimate a woman who looks calm. They think she's harmless. They forget calmness is just control refined. I visited a quiet law office downtown. No big glass towers, just an old building with wooden blinds and the faint smell of old paper. The brass plate on the door read Gregory and Lyle, Estate Law. Mr. Lyle, a man with silver hair and a careful way of speaking, welcomed me in. I handed him the folder Harold had prepared. He flipped through the pages slowly, eyes narrowing at the signatures. "You're saying this was done, without your consent?" "Yes," I replied. "Forged, filed, and approved under false pretenses. I need to make it right legally." He nodded once, serious now. "Mrs. Collins, you still have leverage. The property was originally under your sole ownership before marriage, yes?" "It was." "Then we can act. Quietly but firmly. The key is to secure the title before they realize you're aware of the forgery." That sentence, it felt like armor sliding back into place. We spent 2 hours crafting a plan. First, he would contact the registry discreetly, placing a fraud inquiry hold on the property, a move that freezes transactions without alerting the other parties. Next, I would reopen my old bank account, separate from the joint one Martin had access to. Then, we'd start the legal motion for an ownership verification hearing. When I walked out of that office, the sunlight felt different. Sharper. Like the world had shifted in my favor, even if only slightly. That evening, I acted as though nothing had changed. Angela called to ask about a recipe. Martin laughed from the living room, watching some sports show. I smiled, answered softly, poured them tea. The perfect mother, the perfect hostess. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already cracking. Later that night, when the house went quiet, I stood by the window and looked out at the garden, my husband's roses still blooming despite neglect. He used to say, "You can't rush nature, Ellie. Even justice takes its time." He was right. I wasn't going to scream, or fight, or beg. I was going to wait. A forged signature was a mistake. But underestimating me, that was their real error. I opened my journal and wrote one line. Tomorrow, the net tightens. Revenge doesn't always start with grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins with something as small as a canceled card. The next morning, I went to the bank. The clerk greeted me politely, too politely, as if she knew who I was, but wasn't sure why I was there. I handed her my ID and requested the closure of every joint account linked to Martin's name. "I'd like new cards, new details," I said. "For security purposes."
She didn't ask why.
She just nodded, typing briskly, the sound of the keyboard like music to my ears. When she handed me the new documents to sign, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. By the time I left, Martin's autopay for his luxury car had been declined. His favorite credit card, the one he used for expensive whiskey and cigars, no longer existed. That was my first small cut. The second came later that week. Angela had invited me to dinner, trying to smooth things over. Martin was there too, pretending to be gracious, his fake charm as polished as the silverware. When the bill came, he reached for his card, and the waiter hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. It seems this card's been declined." I didn't look up from my glass of water, but I felt the heat of his stare. He excused himself to make a call, voice sharp and angry, while Angela fidgeted. Another quiet cut. Over the next few days, I made more. I canceled the landscaper's contract he'd overpaid with my money. I redirected the utility bills to my personal account. And I sent a registered letter to the estate management board, alerting them of possible unauthorized adjustments to ownership records. Martin must have sensed something shifting. His arrogance turned brittle. He spoke faster, laughed louder, drank more. One night, I overheard him on the phone, whispering, "She's up to something. I can feel it." He was right. I wasn't just reclaiming my home. I was dismantling his illusion of control, one quiet step at a time. Angela, poor girl, didn't see it yet. She thought I was simply moving on, baking again, spending time in the garden, humming old songs. But everything I did had purpose. Even the calmness she praised was part of the trap. When Martin called me, paranoid for checking the mail myself, I smiled and said, "Maybe. But even paranoia can save a life." He laughed, dismissive, and that laughter told me I still had time. That night, as I poured myself a glass of wine, I wrote in my journal, "He's starting to notice the silence." Because silence, when used right, is louder than any scream. And soon, the walls of my house would echo with it. It arrived in a crisp brown envelope, one simple piece of paper that would change everything. A formal notice of property verification and ownership dispute. Neat, legal, and impossible to ignore. I had it delivered by courier, addressed directly to Mr. Martin Hayes. No drama. No confrontation. Just the truth, dressed in official language and sealed with quiet authority. That morning, I sat by the kitchen window sipping my tea as the courier walked up the front path. Martin was in the garden, barking orders at a worker fixing the fence. When he saw the man hand him the envelope, confusion flickered across his face. Then irritation. Then a spark of fear. He tore it open right there. For a moment, there was silence. Then his voice cut through the air. "What the hell is this?" Angela came running, worry on her face. "Martin," she asked. He waved the papers at her. "Your mother's lost her mind." She's trying to sue us for a house. I stayed seated, calm, unmoving. My house, Martin, I said softly. And I'm not suing you. I'm clarifying ownership. There's a difference. His eyes burned with the kind of rage that hides panic. You won't win. I've got everything signed and stamped. Forged, I replied, still calm. But go ahead, keep shouting. It won't change the law. He stormed off, muttering curses, slamming the door so hard the windows trembled. Angela stood frozen for a moment before following him, torn between loyalty and shame. That night, I heard them arguing.
She cried.
He shouted. I didn't listen too closely. I didn't need to. The cracks were forming on their own. 2 days later, he confronted me again, this time in the hallway. His breath reeked of whiskey. You think you can scare me with papers? He sneered. This house will never be yours again. I looked him dead in the eye. Then I suppose we'll let the courts decide whose name is on the deed. He took a step closer, towering over me. You're making a mistake. I smiled faintly.
No, Martin.
I'm correcting one. When he raised his voice again, I pressed record on my phone, quietly unseen. His threats poured out like poison, every word a confession I would later hand to my lawyer. By morning, the audio file was safely uploaded to a cloud folder labeled Evidence A. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger gives people power. I was simply ready. Before bed, I whispered into the silence of the house. You wanted control, Martin. Let's see how you handle consequences. And as I turned off the light, I smiled. Not with joy, but with certainty. The storm had begun, and I was its calm center. The days after Martin's threats were deceptively quiet. I moved through the house with the same calm rhythm I always had, watering the ferns, folding her linens, writing small notes in my planner. But beneath that calm was a measured calculation. Every phone call, every letter sent, every conversation with my lawyer was another stitch tightening around Martin's arrogance. He mistook my silence for defeat. At dinner, he still smirked across the table, calling her a guest in her own home. Angela forced small smiles, pretending everything was fine. Eleanor simply nodded and passed the salt. Then the first letter arrived. Martin tore it open at the kitchen counter, expecting a bill. His eyes darted across the page, his name bold, the words "Notice of Hearing" stamped at the top. He froze, then muttered, "This has to be a mistake." The next morning, a second envelope came, this time from the bank. He read in silence. The account he'd been dipping into for household expenses was now frozen. The joint mortgage access had been revoked. I didn't say a word. I simply stirred my tea and asked, "Is everything all right?" He didn't answer. Instead, he spent the afternoon pacing the living room, whispering into his phone, voice low and sharp. The confident man who once filled the house with noise now spoke in broken sentences, his tone cracking under invisible weight. Angela began to notice. "Mom," she asked one evening, "why is Martin so tense lately? He's been getting calls from the bank." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, dear, the walls we build to keep others out end up closing in on us." The pressure was silent but constant. Neighbors who once admired Martin's bravado now whispered about late-night shouting, about a man seen tearing letters by the gate. He started coming home later, his shirt untucked, his eyes hollow. I didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Each action ID taken, every form filed, every copy notarized, was now working on my behalf. The law moved slowly, but it moved with purpose. By the end of the month, Martin barely spoke to me. He avoided her gaze at breakfast, muttering to himself as he scrolled through his phone. I watched him quietly, a soft strength in her eyes. I had learned that revenge need not be loud. Sometimes, it's the weight of patience that breaks a man. The morning air was cool, still carrying the faint scent of rain. I woke early, long before the sun climbed above the jacaranda tree that shaded the porch. I brewed my tea, chamomile with honey, and carried it outside, settling into my wicker chair. It was a beautiful morning to end a storm. The movers were already parked discreetly by the curb, waiting for the signal. The eviction order, neatly folded and stamped with the court seal, sat beside my teacup. Inside, the house was almost silent. Angela had left 2 nights earlier to stay with a friend, confused and heartbroken. She'd begged me to reconsider, but my mother had only said, "Sometimes peace must be built on the ruins of pride." At 8:17 a.m., the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the calm. Martin's car pulled into the driveway. Music loud, confidence rehearsed. He stepped out with that same swagger, carrying a briefcase and a smirk that said he still believed he was in control. When he saw the moving truck, the smirk faltered. "What's going on here?" he barked, striding toward the porch. I didn't move. She simply gestured to the folded paper on the table. He snatched it, scanned the first lines, then froze. "Final eviction enforcement order. Property owner, Eleanor Brooks." Color drained from his face. "This is a joke." "It's not," I said softly, her voice even. "The house is mine. It always was." He turned sharply toward the movers. "You can't touch my things. They're not your things anymore, sir," the foreman replied, showing him the court authorization. Martin's voice broke into shouts, half rage, half disbelief. He slammed the gate, kicked a box, cursed under his breath. But the law had already spoken. Each piece of furniture lifted out of the doorway was another truth he could no longer deny. I watched quietly, sipping my tea. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I'd spent months building this moment, and now I only felt release. When Martin finally stopped yelling, he stood in the driveway, eyes wet, pride broken. "Angela will hate you for this," he hissed. I met his gaze. "She'll understand one day that this wasn't hate, it was consequence." By noon, the last of his boxes were gone. The gate clicked shut. I walked back inside, my slippers soft on the clean tiles. I paused by the dining table, the same one where wine had once stained my dress, and ran my hand across the polished surface.
There was peace in the silence now.
For the first time in months, the house truly felt like mine again. The courtroom was small and sterile, its pale walls echoing with low murmurs and the scratch of papers. I sat at the front, my posture straight, hands folded neatly on her lap. Across the aisle sat Martin, hair unkempt, tie loose, face gray from sleepless nights. Angela sat between them, eyes red and tired, her heart visibly torn in two. The judge's voice was calm, procedural. "In the matter of property dispute Brooks versus Miller, the ownership and title deeds have been verified. The property remains under the legal possession of Mrs. Eleanor Brooks." The gavel struck, a sound both final and freeing. Martin's shoulders sagged. He stared at the floor, lips trembling with quiet rage. Angela's hand flew to her mouth, a soundless sob escaped. I didn't smile. There was no joy in triumph, only stillness. Justice, when it comes, rarely feels like victory. After the hearing, Angela approached me in the hallway. Her voice shook. "Mom, how could you let it get this far? You humiliated him. You humiliated me." I turned to her gently. "He humiliated himself, Angela." I simply stopped covering it up. Angela's eyes welled. "You could have talked to me." "I tried," I replied softly. "But you were listening to the man who called your mother a servant in her own home." Silence fell, heavy, painful. For a long time, Angela said nothing. Then she whispered, "I don't know who to be angry at." I nodded. That's the beginning of healing. When anger no longer knows where to live. Martin brushed past them roughly, muttering curses under his breath. The bailiff followed him out. Angela turned to watch him go, tears sliding down her face. I touched my daughter's arm. "You don't have to choose today. Just remember who you were before he taught you to doubt yourself." Angela looked at me, really looked, and for a fleeting moment, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Outside, the afternoon sun washed the courthouse steps in gold. Reporters lingered at the gate, but I ignored them. I had no statement to make. Some victories didn't need headlines, they needed silence. As I walked toward the car, I felt the faintest breeze pass through my hair, light and clean. The weight I'd carried for months had finally lifted. Justice, I thought, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own footsteps, leaving the past behind. Morning light poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden, touching every corner of my restored home. The scent of jasmine drifted in from the garden, my garden, the one Martin had once mocked as a waste of space. Now, the flowers bloomed brighter than ever. I moved slowly, gracefully, setting my cup of tea on the table. The quiet was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, the kind that feels earned. Outside, movers were loading the last of Martin's abandoned things into a van.
I didn't watch.
Some endings didn't deserve witnesses. The walls of the house still bore faint scars, a dent in the dining chair, a small chip in the doorframe, reminders of a storm survived. But to me, they were not wounds. They were proof. Angela had stopped by the night before. The conversation was raw, tentative. "Mom," she had whispered, "I left him." I had taken my daughter's hand. No judgment, no triumph. Just quiet understanding. "You're stronger than you think," I had said. Now, as the house settled back into silence, I opened my back door and stepped onto the porch. The wind carried the faint laughter of neighborhood children, a sound I hadn't truly heard in months. I sat down, sipping my tea, and smiled. The peace I felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like justice done properly, like a door closing gently behind my past. I whispered to herself, "This house stands, and so do I." Because in the end, I didn't just win. She endured.